"Mommy, why is Grandpa standing behind you? He says he misses you." Grandpa had been dead for 3 years. But here's what makes this story absolutely bone-chilling. And it's not what you think. Kids say the weirdest things, don't they? But what happens when those weird things get a little too specific for comfort? When your 4-year-old suddenly knows details about places they've never been, or claims they used to be someone else before they were born. This isn't just playground chatter we're talking about here. These are real stories from real families, shared across the globe for decades, and the details, well, they're enough to make even the most skeptical parent pause mid-bite at dinner. Take the case of a little boy who wouldn't stop insisting he used to be an old man. Not just any old man, mind you. This kid had specifics. He grew potatoes for a living. He lived in a small house with a red door. He even described the smell of the soil after rain, and how his back ached from bending over in the fields all day. The parents laughed it off at first. Kids have wild imaginations, right? But then he started drawing the farm. Detailed sketches of rows and rows of potato plants. He drew the red door, the well in the backyard, even the old truck parked beside the barn. When his mom asked where he learned about farming, he just shrugged and said, "I already knew." Then there's the girl who kept talking about her other house. She described the wallpaper in the kitchen, yellow flowers on a white background. She knew there was a squeaky step on the staircase, third one from the bottom. She even mentioned the cat that used to sleep on the windowsill, a tabby named Chester. Problem is, this family had never owned a cat, and their house was newly built. No yellow wallpaper in sight. These aren't isolated incidents either. Parents from different countries, different cultures, different backgrounds all report similar experiences. A child in Japan claims they used to work in a rice field. A kid in Germany insists they once lived in a castle. Another in Brazil remembers being a fisherman who lost his boat in a storm. The stories pile up, and they're eerily similar in one key way. The children don't seem to be making things up for attention. They're not dramatic about it, or trying to impress anyone. They just state these memories matter-of-factly, like they're talking about what they had for breakfast. Experts have been studying this phenomenon for years now. Some researchers call them past life memories, and take detailed notes. Others dismiss the whole thing as overactive imaginations mixed with random information kids pick up from books, movies, or overheard conversations. The debate rages on in academic circles, with neither side backing down. What makes it even stranger is how young these kids usually are when they start talking. We're talking 2, 3, maybe 4 years old, ages when most children can barely tie their shoes, yet somehow they're describing complex adult experiences with startling accuracy. But past life memories might just be the tip of the iceberg, because some children don't just remember mysterious previous lives, they claim to have friends from places most adults would rather not think about. Most kids have imaginary friends at some point. Tommy the invisible dinosaur, Sarah the fairy princess who lives under the bed. Parents smile and nod, maybe even set an extra place at dinner. It's cute, right? Harmless childhood imagination running wild. But then there are the other cases, the ones that make parents stop smiling. Take the kid who described his friend down to the last detail. Not just he's tall and nice. This child knew the friend's exact eye color, the scar above his left eyebrow, even what he wore every single day. A faded blue work shirt with a torn pocket, brown boots with mud that never came off. The parents had never seen their son be this specific about anything, let alone an invisible person. Well, here's where it gets interesting. The description matched the previous homeowner perfectly, a man who died in that house 3 years before the family moved in. The parents found old photos in the basement later. Every detail was spot on. Then there's the Auntie Tracy situation that went viral on social media. A 4-year-old girl kept talking about how Auntie Tracy read her bedtime stories and sang lullabies. Sweet. Except this family didn't have an Auntie Tracy. When the grandmother visited and heard about this mysterious relative, her face went completely white. Tracy was her sister who died when the little girl's mother was just a baby. Nobody had ever mentioned Tracy around the child, not once. And the weird part is how these conversations usually happen. Kids don't announce their invisible friends dramatically. They mention them casually, like talking about the weather. Auntie Tracy says it's going to rain today. Or my friend thinks you should check the car tire. Matter-of-fact stuff that catches adults completely off guard. Some children get more specific about timing. They'll say their friends only visit at night when everyone else is sleeping. Parents report finding their kids sitting up in bed, apparently having full conversations with empty air at 2 a.m., laughing, nodding, sometimes even arguing with their invisible companions. Let's not forget the kids who claim their friends give them information they couldn't possibly know, like the boy whose friend told him where mom hid the Christmas presents, or the girl whose invisible companion warned her that daddy's car was making a funny noise the day before it broke down on the highway. Child psychologists have different theories. Maybe kids pick up on subtle cues adults miss. Perhaps they overhear conversations and forget where they learn certain details. Could be their developing brains are more open to things we can't explain yet. Makes sense, right? Except that doesn't cover all the cases, especially the ones where kids describe people who died decades before anyone could have told them stories. Parents usually play along until these imaginary relationships start feeling too real. When children begin sharing specific messages from their invisible friends, things shift from adorable to unsettling pretty quickly. But that's nothing compared to what happens when kids start delivering warnings about future events nobody saw coming. You know how kids sometimes blurt out random stuff that makes no sense? Well, what happens when that random stuff turns out to be a warning that could save your life? Parents across the globe have shared stories about their children delivering eerily accurate warnings about dangers they couldn't possibly know were coming. These aren't your typical don't touch the hot stove moments. We're talking about specific detailed alerts that come out of nowhere and leave adults questioning everything they thought they knew about childhood intuition. Take this Reddit story that went viral last year. A 4-year-old girl grabbed her mom's arm right before she was about to leave for work and said, "Don't go outside today. The man will get you." The mom laughed it off initially, but something in her daughter's tone made her pause. That flat, serious delivery that didn't match her usual bubbly personality. She decided to work from home instead. Later that afternoon she found out there had been a string of armed robberies in her neighborhood that morning. 3 people were attacked within 2 blocks of her house. Coincidence? Maybe. But here's where it gets interesting. Child psychologists have documented hundreds of similar cases where kids deliver warnings about events they have zero context for understanding. A 3-year-old tells Grandpa not to drive his blue car today. Grandpa ignores the warning and gets rear-ended at the exact intersection the child had pointed to on a map the night before. Another kid refuses to let his family go to their usual weekend camping spot, throwing an absolute tantrum until parents finally cave and choose a different location. That original campground, flash flooding destroyed half the site that weekend. The weird part is how these warnings are delivered. Parents consistently describe their children speaking in monotone voices, making direct eye contact and showing zero emotion while delivering these messages. It's like watching a tiny weather reporter announce an incoming storm, except the storm is your potential death or injury. Then there's the timing issue that really messes with your head. These warnings often come hours or even days before the actual danger appears. How does a child's brain process threat assessment for future events? Adult brains can barely handle predicting what's for dinner tomorrow. Yet somehow these kids are operating like miniature fortune tellers with a specialization in disaster prevention. Psychologists offer explanations about children picking up on subtle environmental cues that adults miss. Body language, overheard conversations, changes in routine that signal something's off. Makes sense, right? Kids are observant little creatures who haven't learned to filter out seemingly unimportant details yet. But that explanation starts falling apart when you dig deeper into the specifics of these warnings. Children mentioning exact times, specific locations they've never visited, or dangers involving people they've never met. The details get uncomfortably precise for simple environmental awareness. What really keeps parents awake at night isn't just the accuracy of these warnings. It's wondering what happens when their child starts talking about death itself, making predictions that go way beyond simple safety concerns. "You're going to die soon," said one boy to his grandmother, then stared at the clock like he was waiting for something. The grandmother lived another 20 years, but those words haunted family dinners forever after. Death predictions from kids hit differently than other creepy statements. When your 4-year-old casually mentions someone's upcoming demise while eating cereal, it's hard to shake off. These aren't tearful conversations or fearful warnings. Kids deliver these messages with the same tone they'd use to ask for juice. One mother shared how her 3-year-old daughter walked up to her father and announced, "Grandpa Jim won't be here for Christmas." Grandpa Jim seemed perfectly healthy at the time. He died in October. The family still debates whether it was coincidence or something else entirely. But here's what makes it even stranger. Some kids get oddly specific about timing. They'll mention exact dates or describe how someone will pass away. A 5-year-old once told his aunt she'd go to sleep in the White Room and not wake up. 3 months later she had surgery complications and died in the hospital. The White Room detail stuck with everyone who heard it. Then there's the unsettling calmness these children display when discussing death. Adults typically approach the topic with reverence, fear, or sadness. Kids making these predictions seem almost bored by it all. One parent described their son discussing death like he was reading a grocery list. No emotion, just facts. The burial conversations add another layer of weird. One Reddit user's child casually mentioned burying their newborn sibling in the backyard, complete with detailed plans about digging depth and ceremony timing. When asked why, the kid shrugged and said it seemed normal. Makes sense, right? Except it absolutely doesn't. Some children even predict their own deaths with disturbing accuracy. A 7-year-old once told his parents he wouldn't live to see his next birthday because the dark people said so. He died in a car accident 2 weeks before turning 8. His parents found a drawing under his bed showing stick figures in black surrounding a smaller figure. Well, timing isn't the only eerie element. Kids sometimes describe the dying process itself with knowledge they shouldn't possess. They'll mention specific medical details or describe what happens when the light goes away. One child explained to his mother how people's inside voice gets quiet before they die, then demonstrated by whispering softer and softer until no sound came out. And the weird part is how other family members react to these statements. Parents report feeling genuinely unsettled for weeks afterward, checking on elderly relatives more frequently or avoiding certain activities their child warned against. The predictions create this underlying tension that follows families around like a shadow. Pediatricians often suggest these statements stem from kids processing death concepts they've encountered through media or conversations. But that doesn't explain the specific details or accurate timing some children provide. But death predictions aren't the only unsettling knowledge kids seem to possess. Sometimes they know intimate details about people they've never met, describing deceased relatives with startling accuracy. Ever wondered how a 4-year-old could spot their dead great-grandmother in a dusty family photo? Well, buckle up because this happens way more than you'd think. Picture this: little Emma walks into her grandma's living room and points straight at an old black and white photograph hanging on the wall. "That's the lady who reads me bedtime stories," she says with complete confidence. The problem: that lady died 15 years before Emma was born. Nobody had ever mentioned her name or shown Emma that photo before. Yet there she was, picking out Great-Aunt Margaret like they were old friends. Then there's the case of 3-year-old Marcus. His family just moved into a new house, and during his first week there he casually mentioned Mona to his parents. "Mona used to live here," he said while playing with his toy cars. "She liked the kitchen best." His parents brushed it off as typical kid imagination until they met their elderly neighbor. Turns out, a woman named Mona had lived in that exact house for 30 years before passing away. She was known for spending most of her time baking in the kitchen. Marcus had never met anyone who knew this information. But here's where it gets really strange. These aren't isolated incidents happening in one spooky town or culture. Parents from completely different countries and backgrounds report identical experiences. A mother in Japan describes her son identifying his deceased grandfather in old family albums. A father in Brazil shares how his daughter knew intimate details about her late aunt's favorite songs. The pattern repeats itself across continents with unsettling consistency. What makes these stories particularly unnerving is the level of specific detail these kids provide. They don't just say vague things like "I knew a nice lady." Instead, they mention exact names, describe physical features, and recall personal habits that only close family members would remember. One child accurately described how his dead uncle always tapped his fingers on tables when he was thinking. Another knew that her deceased grandmother collected ceramic elephants and kept them on a specific shelf in the bedroom. Researchers have been scratching their heads over this phenomenon for decades. Some suggest children might be picking up on subtle cues from family conversations they've overheard. Others propose that old photographs or family heirlooms might trigger subconscious memories somehow passed down through genetics. The explanations sound reasonable, until you hear about kids who identify people in unmarked photos stored in attics, or mention relatives whose existence was deliberately kept secret from them. The scientific community remains split on whether these incidents represent genuine supernatural connections or simply demonstrate how remarkably observant and intuitive young children can be. Skeptics point out that parents might unconsciously provide hints through their reactions and body language. Believers argue that some connections transcend our current understanding of human consciousness and memory. What everyone agrees on is that these experiences feel incredibly real to the families involved, and the accuracy rate of these childhood recognitions is disturbing enough to make even the most logical parents question what they thought they knew about life and death. But if mysterious family connections weren't creepy enough, wait until you hear what some kids draw and describe when the lights go out. When kids start describing shadowy figures lurking in their bedrooms, parents usually brush it off as nightmares. But some descriptions are way too detailed for comfort. A 5-year-old in Michigan told her mom about the black circles that floated around her ceiling every Tuesday night. Not monsters, not ghosts. Black circles. She drew them obsessively, perfect dark rings that seemed to move across the paper even when she wasn't touching her crayon. Then there's the kid who couldn't stop talking about the nothings. His dad asked what they looked like. "You can't see nothings, Daddy. That's why they're scary." The boy would whisper about how the nothings watched him sleep and made the air feel heavy. He'd refuse to go upstairs alone, claiming they lived in the corner where the hallway met his bedroom door. Art therapists have been studying these drawings for years, hoping to crack some psychological code. What they've found is disturbing consistency. Kids from different states, different families, different backgrounds, they all draw similar dark shapes. Tall shadow people, faceless figures standing at the foot of beds, black masses that seem to absorb light rather than reflect it. One mother in Texas found her daughter's sketchbook filled with pictures of a woman with no eyes, just empty sockets that the child had colored in with heavy black marker. "She visits when mommy's cooking dinner," the little girl explained matter-of-factly. "She doesn't like the kitchen lights, so she stays in the living room and watches me play." The creepy part, their house had an open floor plan. You could see the living room from the kitchen perfectly. But here's where it gets really weird. Some kids don't just see these figures, they interact with them. A 7-year-old in Ohio told his babysitter that the gray man taught him a new game. The game involved staring at the bathroom mirror in complete darkness until something stares back. The babysitter obviously shut that down fast, but the kid seemed genuinely confused about why adults were so upset about his new friend. Parents often notice these descriptions get more intense during times of stress or change. Moving to a new house, starting school, family problems, suddenly the dark figures become more frequent visitors in their child's stories. Psychologists suggest this could be how kids process anxiety, but that doesn't explain why the imagery is so consistently terrifying across different children. The most unsettling part might be how matter-of-fact kids sound when describing these encounters. No dramatic fear, no crying, just casual conversation about shadow people and floating shapes. "The lady with black hair stands by my closet sometimes. She's not mean, just sad." Said like they're discussing the weather. What makes parents lose sleep isn't just the descriptions themselves, but how their kids seem genuinely puzzled that adults can't see these things too. Makes you wonder what else might be hiding in those childhood shadows that grown-ups have simply learned to ignore. Speaking of things that make parents question reality, wait until you hear what happens when kids' voices completely change. You know how your voice cracks when you're nervous or sick? Well, imagine your 3-year-old suddenly sounding like they've been smoking cigars for 40 years. That's exactly what happened to one mum when her toddler started speaking in a voice so deep and raspy, she thought someone else had entered the room. These voice changes aren't subtle. We're talking about complete transformations that make parents do double takes. One father described his 4-year-old daughter's voice dropping several octaves during bedtime, becoming gravelly and ancient. The words coming out weren't typical kid complaints about vegetables or bedtime either. She started talking about the old days and mentioned people by names the family had never heard. What makes this even stranger? The kids don't seem to realize anything unusual is happening. They'll switch between their normal squeaky voice and this otherworldly tone mid-conversation, like they're changing radio stations. One parent recorded their son doing this during dinner, and when they played it back later, the child didn't recognize the deeper voice as his own. Then there's the timing of these episodes. They don't happen randomly during happy moments. Most parents report the voice changes occurring during arguments, late at night, or when the child is upset about something. It's like stress triggers a completely different personality to surface. One Reddit user shared how their son's voice would change whenever he got angry, and he'd start speaking about things that happened before Mama was born. But here's where it gets really unsettling. Sometimes these voices come with knowledge the kids shouldn't have. A 5-year-old in Texas started speaking in a southern accent his family had never heard, talking about cotton fields and mentioning historical details about slavery that weren't age-appropriate or something he'd learned in school. His normal voice returned after 20 minutes, and he went back to asking for juice boxes. Medical professionals struggle to explain these incidents. Vocal cord changes in young children typically result from illness or physical development, but these transformations happen instantly and reverse just as quickly. No sore throats, no colds, no obvious triggers that would affect their vocal cords physically. Some parents find humor in these moments after the initial shock wears off. One mom joked that her daughter's demon voice was actually more polite than her regular tantrums. The deep-voiced version said please and thank you while discussing mysterious topics, which was better than her usual screaming about wanting cookies. The really bizarre part: guests and strangers react much more strongly to these voice changes than family members do. Babysitters have refused to return after hearing a child speak in an adult male voice. Grandparents have called priests, but parents, after living with it for months, sometimes barely look up from their coffee. These episodes rarely last more than an hour, and most kids don't remember what they said afterward. They'll ask why everyone looks scared or why daddy is recording them on his phone. Makes you wonder what other strange things kids do without realizing it, doesn't it? Speaking of things kids say without understanding their impact, kids drop bombshells at the worst possible moments, like when they're sitting at breakfast, calmly eating cereal and announce "I died but now I'm here." No emotion, no drama, just a casual statement delivered between spoonfuls of Cheerios. Parents freeze. What exactly are you supposed to say to that? Pass the milk, honey, and also explain what you mean by dying. Then there's the planning phase some children seem to go through. Not planning birthday parties or playdates, planning harm. A 3-year-old might look up from their coloring book and mention how they want to throw their baby sister into the fireplace. Matter-of-fact tone, like they're discussing the weather. The scary part isn't just what they say, it's how they say it. No anger, no visible emotion, no indication they understand the weight of their words. Pure clinical delivery that makes adults question everything they thought they knew about childhood innocence. One Reddit user shared how their 4-year-old son asked what would happen if someone got hurt really badly. Normal question for a curious kid, right? But when pressed for details about how someone might get hurt, the boy responded without hesitation, with a sharp knife. The specificity hit different than typical childhood curiosity. These aren't tantrums or attention-seeking behaviors. Kids making these statements often seem completely detached from the implications. They're not trying to shock anyone, which somehow makes it worse. It's like they're reporting facts from some internal manual the rest of us can't access. Parents find themselves walking on eggshells after hearing these confessions. Do you punish a child for something they said? Do you ignore it and hope it goes away? Most end up somewhere in the middle, gently steering conversations away from death and violence, while mentally taking notes of every strange comment. But here's where things get really interesting. Some children don't just make random dark statements, they provide context that shouldn't exist in their young minds. They describe methods, consequences, or scenarios with disturbing accuracy, almost like they're drawing from experience they shouldn't have. Child psychologists recommend staying calm during these episodes. Don't overreact, don't panic, but also don't completely dismiss what you're hearing. Kids pick up more than adults realize from movies, conversations, and the world around them. Sometimes they're just processing information in their own weird way. The challenge is figuring out which statements are normal developmental phases and which ones might signal something deeper. Most children eventually outgrow these dark observations as they develop better social awareness and emotional regulation. Still, parents never quite forget the moment their sweet toddler looked them in the eye and casually discussed violence or death. Those conversations stick around long after the child has moved on to more typical concerns like cartoons and playground politics. What makes these confessions particularly unsettling is their timing. Kids don't save these revelations for therapy sessions or private moments, they drop them during car rides, family dinners, or bedtime stories. But the strangest part might be what happens right after these chilling statements, when normal childhood behavior resumes like nothing unusual just occurred.